Today I brought you to Hampstead, and it's a really beautiful March day. What have we done to deserve this? And I brought you to what I think is one of the most atmospheric cemeteries in London. We're here in Hampstead, and if we just have a little pan around, you get a feel for the place. This is called Happy Histories. Of course, I've taken you to a cemetery where people don't associate with the happiness. But I remember my mother, where she rested in peace, she said the reason we write rest in peace on the tombstones is because we get more rest in the grave than we do in the world. But it really is a wonderful place. And I brought you here specifically to tell you about this gentleman here, Mr. John Harrison. And we have reason to celebrate this gentleman because he saved hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. He was born in 1693, and he was born to a humble builder, and he was brought up to follow his father in his business. He was actually a carpenter, but in his spare time he loved to meddle with clocks, and he taught himself everything there was to know about timepieces. Now, and his invention, as I said before, would save thousands of lives. And he entered into a competition because in 1707 we had what's called the Scilly disaster. There were 5 ships of the line, and they were sailing back to England. Now at the time, mariners, they could tell pretty precisely where they were, north, south, but their longitude, that was harder for them to gauge. And the captain, he brought 4 ships onto the rocks with a loss of about 1,000 mariners. And the government, they put out a competition for somebody to find a really reliable timepiece, because if you knew what time it was here in London, if you were sailing west or east, if you looked at the sun and figured out what time it was where you were and the time distance between Greenwich Mean Time and where you were, you could work out where you were quite accurately. So lots of people went in for this competition, and all sorts of wacky ideas. People came up with all sorts of very odd ideas. The one that I really love the most, and you might find this difficult to believe, one guy suggested that people would take a dog on board. But the thing was, that dog would have a cut on his thigh, which they wouldn't allow to heal. And at a certain time, the knife that cut them would be plunged into cold water, and the dog, through psychic abilities, would feel the pain. And they would know, okay, this is the time in London, because the dog would tell them by yelping with the pain. And they could see what time, and they could figure out where they were. But Mr. Harrison, he had a much better idea. He worked on clocks, as I said before. Now, the traditional clock, of course, has a pendulum, which is quite useless at sea because of the way that the ship is moving in the water. But he worked out a way where the pendulums were upright, and they were on both sides to balance out the movement at sea. And the first one that he had, he called the H1. And it was incredibly accurate. And the Admiralty allowed him to take it on a sea trial. And he sailed down to Lisbon. And on the way there, it wasn't so terribly accurate. But poor John Harrison, he was suffering terribly from seasickness. However, on the way back, it was a lot better. And but it wasn't accurate enough to win the competition that the government had put forward. So he worked on H2, and this improved greatly, but he wasn't allowed to take it to sea because when he was working on it, we were at war with Spain. And this was like the Enigma machine. We couldn't let it get into the hands of the enemy. But he went from working on clocks to working on what we'd see as a large watch that you might put in your jacket. And this was a real game changer. And in fact, Captain Cook used this watch when he was sailing on the Pacific down to New Zealand and places like this. He referred to the watch as his faithful friend. It worked very accurately. And, he put this to the government, and he asked for the prize. And he spent years of his life working on this, getting little bits of money from the government and the Admiralty. And the prize was £20,000, which would be about 4 million now. But he was just a builder, really. And he wasn't an aristocrat like the members of Parliament and people in the Admiralty, and they were loath to give him his money. But in fact, he appealed to the King, George III, and eventually he was given his money. He was at the age of 80 when he was given his prize, and he only lived for 3 more years to enjoy, the millions that had come his way. But the main thing about this gentleman, of course, is the lives that he has saved, as I said before. And in fact, there's a memorial to him in Westminster Abbey, and he's classed as one of the greatest Englishmen who's ever lived because of his contribution to science. And the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers, they have refurbished his tomb here in 1879. Because he spent the last years of his life here in London. Anyway, thank you for watching, and look out for some more videos.